Hey, Teddy K here for the Best Buy blog, and in this video review, we look at the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra that not only comes with the S Pen, but also has some improvements for the camera and to make it a gaming device. I guess you could say that the Galaxy S23 Ultra is what happens when Samsung pulls out all the stops for its flagship phone, because that's essentially really what happened here. This is, no question, this is an expensive device. It is a premium device in a lot of ways, but at least it comes with something that's new, or at least things that feel new. I felt like the Galaxy S22 Ultra was very iterative. It was a good phone, but it was an iterative, incremental upgrade over its predecessor. This is to some degree, but it feels like it's something more as well. And a lot of that is driven by performance in areas that needed some improvement. So for example, the camera stuff, we're going to get to that, but then you have the fact that Samsung is positioning this as a gaming device as well. There's a new cooling system inside that keeps it from getting really hot or too hot when you're playing for longer periods of time. I'll touch a little bit on some of the design elements here, especially one that I like, which is that this display is a little bit flatter than the previous ones were. Not fully flat, unfortunately, which is what I would prefer, but that the curve on each side now on the edges is very slight now in comparison. That to me is good, not just for holding and handling the phone, especially when it comes to taking photos as well, but I feel like if you're going to use the S Pen, you also kind of want a display that's a little easier, I think, to manage as well. The S Pen, it's a good segue actually, because the S Pen, it does figure into this. There are no new features that are specific to the pen for this phone, so the performance is largely the same as to how it was for the Galaxy S22 Ultra. This is, of course, the only phone in the S23 lineup, or the trio of phones, that supports the S Pen. So in effect, what we have here is a Galaxy Note by another name, because that's really kind of what the phone felt like when using the pen. I don't really jot down a lot of notes using the pen. I do on occasion. I do like some of the features. I always have, because I've been using them for years, but I actually have always liked the pen for editing photos, especially given that Samsung has teamed up with Adobe to integrate Lightroom to some extent into the camera features, which is specifically for Expert RAW, but again, I'll get to that in a second. The main thing is just that the pen is effective, at least in being a little more precise, and you do have a fairly large display. It's the same dynamic AMOLED, 2x display, so everything about the screen is pretty much the same as it was before. So again, nothing really changed there, just the design. Gorilla Glass Victus 2 protection, and I have to say, I accidentally dropped this phone once and I didn't see a smudge on it. So that's a good indication that it's got some durability that you can rely on, but as always, I always recommend putting on a case on a phone like this. It's just too expensive not to. From a performance standpoint, I will mention there's just nothing really to complain about here as far as how well it functions, how fluid everything feels. Everything about the phone and how it works, from opening apps to streaming content to basically doing anything it is you want to do, especially also for work-related stuff. So if you're thinking of a hybrid situation where you're using a phone for both personal and work reasons, this phone can definitely handle that. I don't think that's going to be any problem at all. From the gaming standpoint, it's true that this phone does perform better than previous ones did. It doesn't get hot. You know, I played a bunch of games on this, both from Google Play and also from Xbox Game Pass, and it was not a problem at all. I mean, the screen is beautiful, obviously, but it's also just that they run really, really smoothly. I didn't notice any frame rate issues, any lag, things like that. That's always a good sign, I think, because if you are looking to use this as a gaming machine, you can definitely trust that it will do a good job. So that leaves the camera, right? Because the camera is sort of, at this point, it is the jewel. It's the main thing that Samsung is positioning this phone to be different from others. And it is different, especially from previous Samsung phones, in a couple of ways. So for one, I like that Samsung is looking also at photographers that know a little bit more, perhaps the novices do. So for example, there's more ways to shoot in RAW. So Expert RAW, which was introduced in the previous phone, is back, only this time you can embed it in the camera app as well, which is very, very good, something that definitely needed to be done from before. You can also shoot at 50 megapixels in RAW as well, using that mode, which is excellent. You were limited to 12 megapixels before that. New features like astrophotography and multiple exposure are also in Expert RAW. Multiple exposure is interesting. It takes some getting used to, and it is a bit finicky. It's definitely gimmicky, but if you can take one photo of something and then overlay it onto another for some interesting composites, or you can try and take photos of the same subject that is moving within the same frame and then merge them together in one shot as well. It's interesting. It's been done on other phones. It's not entirely new, but it's fairly well implemented here, but just it is going to need some work, I think, because there are definitely some bugs. Anyway, the main thing though that I mean, raw shooting aside, which is pretty good, and I love having that feature. It's what I prefer to shoot with. But to have 200 megapixels is interesting too. So this is a very, it's a lot of pixels. The image sensor, it's not a 1-inch sensor like other phones have, but the image sensor is, fairly sizable, and you have a lot of pixels to work with. 200 megapixels, again, I always say, megapixels don't make a camera, but if the software going with those pixels is pretty good, then you might have something. So when you shoot at 200 megapixels, first of all, the files are huge, number one. So, but when you can zoom in on that, like when you can crop in, the level of detail that the phone is able to maintain is impressive. And for that reason alone, I think it's worth shooting in that, especially if you're shooting from a distance, you want to capture something from a distance, or maybe you're trying to capture a large vista and you want to maintain some detail. It's very, very good for that. Ideally, you want to do this during daytime or with good lighting. Otherwise, noise creeps into the image, especially in low light or night. So it has its limitations, which is why I think also Samsung included a 50 megapixel mode that you can choose to shoot as well. It's kind of like an intermediate between the 12 megapixels, which is the default. What happens there is pixel binning will take 16 pixels and merge them into one larger pixel, which is better at gathering light, right? So that's, again, not a new feature. That's something that Samsung has done before, only in this case you do it with more pixels. So 16:1 is a fairly large ratio, and that's why the 12 megapixel shots generally shoot a lot better in low light and nighttime than a 50 or a 200 megapixel shot would. I'm really just almost scratching the surface here of all the camera stuff that's going on here. The filtering system is actually something that I think no one really mentions, or Samsung doesn't talk about, but you can actually download other filters that you can shoot with as well in the camera app, and also you can create your own. So if you want to use one of your photos as a way to create a filter, you can do that. And the other lenses also, I think, shoot very well as well. So if you are shooting with the 2 telephoto lenses or the ultra wide, there have been some good improvements there. Again, a lot of this is software, right? So the software has, across the board, has better computation in producing more dynamic range, or better dynamic range at least, for shots that I think just look better naturally. Samsung does have a tendency to pop colors a little bit, so you still will get some of that saturation that the company's been known for a long time. But for the most part, I think images look definitely better in this phone than they did in at least the 3 previous phones, by I'd say a fair margin as well. Largely because of the versatility and how broad the performance is. So for example, whether you're shooting in low light or you're shooting from a distance, you're shooting broad, it's bright daylight, indoors, outdoors, some action shots, you're going to see that across the board, the output is just better. And that's definitely something that's good, because it means you can rely on some good shots no matter where you are. That also goes for video. So video benefits from some of the same computation as well. And so some of the shots, especially in low light, Samsung talked a lot about this. And look, Hollywood directors aside, which is what, Ridley Scott, I mean, you don't have a film crew, okay, like he does to shoot footage with his phone. But I will say in low light, there is an improvement. It is better than it used to be. So if you are looking to shoot video, I definitely recommend using either the video mode or Pro Video especially, which has more cinematic sort of, effects, or at least cinematic features that make more sense, like 24 frames per second, for example, and also 20:9, aspect ratio. So you have something that feels like you're shooting a movie, I think, is the best way I would describe it. The battery held up quite well. I did not have to recharge this in the middle of the day, for example, and I didn't notice any serious battery drain for, on anything that I was doing. That is a very good sign early on. Hopefully it lasts. The phone charges the same as it did before, so there's no faster charging. It's not that anything changes there. It'll charge the same way as it has before, and that's it basically. But at least you can rely on it to last a full day. A couple of things I'm going to point out that I think are very important to mention. Number one is that the system files, okay, storage, so internal storage, this phone starts at 256 gigs, and there's a reason for that. It's not just because of how big the RAW and 200 megapixel image files are, it's also because of the system files. So basically what is already preloaded, what is already installed on this phone from the moment you take it out of the box is between 60 to 70 gigabytes. That's right, 60 to 70 gigs is already taken up out of the box. So you bear in mind that now 256, 512, and even the 1 terabyte, okay, that's a lot. You don't have a micro SD card slot. You can't expand on it in any way, but that is a lot of space to take up out of the box. So it's an unfortunate drawback, but it is something to consider. This is a nice phone, and I would recommend upgrading to this, and even considering an upgrade from the S22. Normally I say skip a year, but if you're into the camera features, if you're really looking for an upgrade on the photography side and you're a gamer on top of that, this might be a phone you might want to consider moving up to, especially now if you have an older device and you're thinking of moving over to this, you probably won't be disappointed in the full gamut of what it offers you. It's an impressive phone in a lot of ways, expensive, so you are going to pay for it, but you probably won't be disappointed in what it does. And that's my review of the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra for the Best Buy blog. I'm Teddy K. Thanks for watching.